Good day to you. Yeah, just another day sitting around in this pandemic, just sitting around waiting for things to change in the greater world outside of us. And things are changing. I'm not sure how they're changing, but here in Monroe County, tomorrow we're going to move into a yellow status, meaning that we're going to start to open up, and ESU is going to start to receive some essential workers back on campus. That's a significant development. Throughout this pandemic, how have your movements been limited? When you go out and about your day these days, what's it like for you? Are you in a hardcore quarantine as I am and my family are? That means we're always socially distancing. We're trying not to go. We haven't been in a grocery store since the middle of March, and we're just extremely careful with what we touch. I'm not a paranoid person, but we're just being very careful because why not if you can? But my movements, just like your movements, have been limited. And when your movements are limited, it also limits your access to media. Just think about your days before the pandemic, what they might have been like. Hopping in your car, if you have a car, and turning on the radio and listening to whatever was coming on and scanning that band and listening to whatever else you can find until you get to your destination. Think about pulling into a gas station, getting out and listening to the radio that the gas station is playing. Think about going into the gas station if you have to pay whatever you're going to pay for, and you're seeing newspapers and magazines, at least the front pages of them, as you're getting ready to check out. Think about coming home at night and inviting friends over and deciding to watch some Netflix, or sitting down with your family, watching a movie, or watching sports. Think about all your web usage. Now, there's something that may not have changed. In fact, your web usage, your internet usage may have gone up in the pandemic. So why am I belaboring the opening to today's discussion? It's to try and set up what we're talking about, which has to do with the accessibility of media. It has to do with how easy are media to access on your daily basis, and what media do you come into naturally versus what media do you have to work hard to get to. Media that come to you naturally would be like when you pick up your TV remote control and you just start scrolling through those first few channels. They're the first ones that you come to. Your TV's probably going to start at channel 2. So those first 10 channels have a greater chance of grabbing a person's attention than channels 23, 68, channel 104, etc., just by virtue of being lower in the scheme of where channels are listed. Think about the way that you use the internet. You have to pay for it, right? Are you paying for it through your cable company? Are you paying it through your cell phone company? Are you paying for it through another provider? And what kind of access do you have? Are your speeds slow? Is it really kind of a hassle for you to download videos? I tell you, I've been running into a lot of problems uploading my videos. I could increase my tiered usage, but I'm also saying to myself, I'm trying to weigh extra costs like everybody else is right now. And will my household need as much internet after next week when this course ends? It's something that I'm trying to weigh right now. It has to do with my accessibility to the internet, and I can imagine that the accessibility for many of you in this pandemic is absolutely horrible. You're sharing it with people in your household. You're in areas that have dead spots. You have Wi-Fi limitations. There's a lot of difficulty to access the internet right now. What about newspapers? Are you coming into contact with newspapers? It wasn't too long ago you could see newspapers lining the driveways of people in and around your neighborhood. And those newspapers would be shared. And also people would purchase newspapers, but hardly any newspapers are read by young people today, at least in print form. So accessibility is all about, as you go through your daily existence, what media do you come into contact with? What media are really hard to come into contact with? You have to pay extra for them. You need to be a certain age to watch them. You need to have certain technology like a TiVo or whatever that gives you access to the media content. And then what kinds of media content are out there that you're not even aware of? Are you aware of this show in Denmark? This is truly an incredible show that exists. It's a show, I forget the title of it, we watched some of it a couple summers ago, that airs on public broadcasting. And I'm setting up the anticipation of this show that way because I'm trying to set it up to be a pretty outrageous show, which it is. What the show is it's a male who's a well-known TV commentator in Denmark, and he's a poet, and he's got some other artistic dimensions to him that have been exhibited in his media appearances on talk shows and as a comedian, etc. So he has this show where he judges women's bodies. Yeah, you heard me right. He judges women's bodies. And what the format of the show is, he sits there in his chair and he invites on a special guest. And that special guest is also going to be a kind of celebrity in the media. And then a woman comes out in only a robe. It's a very darkened setting. And she takes off her robe and they examine her body. They have her turn around. They talk about her, quote, ass. They talk about her breasts. And she stands there and at least the episodes that I saw, she accepts the comments. And we're not talking about women who are necessarily young, necessarily have an archetypal body type to them. They are all age ranges of women. I saw a woman who was in her 60s who did this show. And they both comment on these two evaluators, these two judges, on every dimension of her body. Not in a crude way necessarily from the point of view of talking about genitals in the crude way that they can be talked about, but the idea of objectifying the body on a public television show is a pretty crazy development in TV broadcasting. And did you know about it? Did you know that that show exists? If you don't have accessibility to it, and you're not able to consider the fact that this isn't even a commercial show on HBO, that this is a public service broadcaster like PBS. Well, not quite. We've already established how PBS is different. So accessibility deals not just with those media that are really easy to find by virtue of your daily habits, going around and reading the web, and sending texts, and going on social media, hearing radio, watching TV at night, streaming shows late at night, and streaming shows in the middle of the night when you can't sleep. It has to do also with what those programs are that are really hard to get to, which are really expensive to acquire, which require you to have technology that you may not be able to access, or programs which are just not distributed, media content that is just not distributed by virtue of where your location is in the world or what country you're in. So that's what this set of readings is all about. And what it reveals to us is the range of content that we are exposed to. But it also reveals to us some of the content that we are simply not exposed to. And this takes us back to that term, epistemology. How can we understand what the limitation of our knowledge is? That's what epistemology is. And when you take a look around and discover what else is out there, then you can discover what your epistemological basis is for understanding media. So in a way, studying accessibility, as we are doing today, reveals the limitations on your knowledge. Accessibility is likened to the feeder branches of a tree. To come back to that tree metaphor, we have the trunk. We have the main branches. They are financing. The trunk is regulation. Main branches are financing. Now we're getting into the feeder branches that start to go out to the leaves. This is what delivers the leaves or the content of the tree or the content of the media system to the passersby, to the audience member. But the feeder branch is what we're looking at today as the accessibility portion. It's what's delivering the leaf close to you, like when you walk up to a tree. Can you pick a tree? Can you pick a leaf real easily? Or they're leaves that you can't reach? That would be a liken to knowing that there are HBO programs out there, but you don't subscribe to HBO. And then there are leaves on the other side of the tree that you don't even see. And that would be an example of media content like that Danish show that I mentioned that's out there. So accessibility is an important element to study when we're studying a media system. It gives you a real sense of whether your country has diverse offerings or not, especially when you discover what else is out there. Now, there's lots of terms in this chapter, definitional terms, that are used to help you understand that the way that media are categorized across the world is somewhat different. Let's talk about newspapers first. Newspapers, how often do you read a newspaper? You might say never. But actually, newspapers still have a place because their headlines show up in Twitter feeds, show up in other social media. The typical kind of contact that the average American, especially in your age range, considering 18 up to 28, maybe more in this class, that age range is not looking at physical hard copies of newspapers. But what you're doing is you're wanting to know about the fugitive from Connecticut who was down here in the Poconos and wanted for murder. And you're wanting to know if that person was captured, and that person was captured. They were captured in Maryland yesterday. But how are you finding out about it? Well, some headline from some local newspaper, the Morning Call, or whatever, which is in Lehigh Valley, pushes to your news feed on your social media, and that's how you're accessing newspapers. So newspapers do still have a role in almost everybody's lives. Typically, newspapers have been categorized as either broadsheets or tabloids. Broadsheets is where you have to open them up, and then they become a dimension that is more like letterbox on our TV once the paper is opened up. And also, when you open that paper for the first time, you open it twice, right? You open it once this way and you open it again this way, and then you flip pages. When you open it that first time, there's a fold in the middle. And those stories that are above the fold are known as top of the fold stories. They're supposed to be the most important stories, the headline stories, the breaking news stories, the hard news stories. They come above the fold, and then below the fold, you're going to have lesser information. You may be using some ads down in there. Not lesser information, but less important information. So broadsheets typically were known as more serious newspapers. They are covering crime, they're covering politics, they're covering sports, they're covering current affairs. That's what broadsheets do best at because there's a width to them, and that allows for more depth in terms of the length of the line horizontally. It can have more information in it. So broadsheets are naturally inclined to be more serious. Versus tabloids, tabloids have a different dimension, right? Tabloids comes from the word that was used for Moses. It's a biblical term. It comes from tablet. Christianity doesn't have a monopoly on the term. The word tablet was actually used to describe one of the very first media in which writing could be preserved on in a clay tablet and then carried around. But that shape now, which is the same shape as your cell phone, it's a vertical portrait shape, if you want to think of it that way, is for tabloid newspapers. And tabloid newspapers are more sensational because that vertical shape lines up perfectly with framing a human being in a photo. That's why I use my cell phone, by the way, to create my instructor videos, because I don't want to have me buried in the shot. I don't want to have a wide shot with things that would be distracting on the side. I want the phone to be framing me as much as possible so that I can hopefully have the focus on my lecture for the day. So tabloids, because they are more inclined to photos of people because of their shape, they're more inclined towards sensationalism, more inclined towards scandal, political corruption, sexual scandal, drug abuse, Hollywood celebrities, politicians. These are regular subjects of tabloid newspapers. Tabloids and broadsheets have typically been split up into different areas of content. However, if you go to England, you will find that tabloids cross both areas. You have tabloids that are both sensational, and they're also serious with breaking news. The Daily Mail, the Daily Mirror, the Sun, the Daily Express. These are all examples of tabloids that are also communicating serious news. As I said, though, most newspapers today have shifted over to websites, and they're really struggling with how to monetize their content, how to make money off of their content. And that's because people have grown up with the idea that you pay a subscription for a newspaper, it arrives in your driveway, and you never have to worry about paying for it. And so people are not used to paying for things on the internet. So when they read newspapers on the internet, they're not wanting to pay for a newspaper story. So newspapers are combating this in quite a few ways. The most typical way is you're allowed 3 reads per week or 3 reads per month. Three times you open an article is what it comes down to on a newspaper's website. And then you have to pay. Then there is the paywall that you have to get past. So that's true for the Washington Post. It's true for the New York Times. It's even true for a local newspaper like the Pocono Record. And that's how newspapers are delivered today, still struggling. You don't want to cut off access, but you can't give away your content for free. You know, I was a columnist for the Pocono Record for 3 years. I did it voluntarily. I worked very closely with the editor, Chris Melly. And I was a big reader of the Pocono Record for many years. I grew up in a newspaper generation. My very first job was actually folding advertisements into newspapers and then throwing them onto people's driveways in Texas. And my grandfather, he worked for the Daily Mirror, which is a British newspaper after he fought in World War II. So I have some kind of deep connections to the newspaper industry, and I've watched it collapse. I've watched the number of people employed at the Pocono Record dwindle. And yet there's still a viability to newspapers. They still have an automatic authenticity and sincerity and integrity to them that they can carry over that is not necessarily carried over by Yahoo News, for example. So newspapers are still finding their way. Now let's go into radio and television. Here we find some very big differences between the way that television is structured in the United States versus the way that it's structured in Europe. We'll start with the station. You don't really have TV stations in Europe, but you have TV stations in the United States because mostly our media operate under a libertarian philosophy, so we allow private businesses to set up how they want to distribute their content on their own. And the way that the television industry has organized itself in the United States, not that it's been free from regulation, the way that the television industry has organized itself in the United States is around the TV station. Yeah, the TV station. Your TV station can be affiliated with a network like NBC, ABC, or CBS. That's when you're known as a network affiliate. Or your TV station can also be independent, like WFMZ, which is one of the few remaining mom and pop television stations in the country, but happens to be located in Lehighton, Pennsylvania. And so we have stations, and these stations create their own content, and they also bring in network content. If they bring in network content, they are paying, the network is paying the TV affiliate to carry the network programming, like Big Bang Theory or whatever the CSI show is that's airing in the evening. Why do networks pay affiliates? It's because when they deliver the TV show, the half hour long, they have slots in there that are reserved for their own advertisements, their own national advertisements for McDonald's or Allstate or Monsters.com, whatever the national ad is, it gets implanted in that half hour of programming that gets sent out to all the affiliate TV stations across the nation. And that's how the networks gain what they call clearance, which is getting their content to clear on their own network of affiliate stations. So if you watch TV in the United States, you're probably watching it as it originates from a TV station. Now, I've mentioned the word network. Network is not a physical TV property. A network is a studio for all intents and purposes, like the NBC studio in Times Square in New York City. And those networks create the programs and then they send them out to their network affiliates. So that's the relationship between stations and networks in the United States. Here in Pennsylvania, for example, WNEP, which is in the Scranton-Wilkes-Barre area, is an ABC affiliate. Now let's move on to a TV channel. We do use the word TV channel in this country, but it mostly refers to the number that we've assigned to it on our TV set. What channel is ESPN? What channel is the Weather Channel? What channel is the Cooking Network? What channel is Oprah Winfrey's network on? That's the way that we talk about channels. Oh, it's channel 2. Oh, well, that's funny. In my town, it's channel 5. Well, in my town, it's channel 6. It doesn't really matter. What matters is you see the brand of CBS, ABC, Oprah Winfrey, whatever. In Europe, the channel has a different designation. Because television has a strong public service component in Europe under a social responsibility philosophy, you have entire channels which are devoted to national programming. So the BBC, for example, in Britain, has 2 television channels out of 5 terrestrial television channels. I'll define terrestrial in a moment. Has 2 television channels that are national channels. It means that wherever you go in Britain, you can go to the tippy-top John O'Groats in the north of Scotland. Let me tell you, that's way up there in desolate country. You can also go to the heart of London. And because the national government has said we want to have a channel that provides public service programming to everybody in the country, regardless of where you live, you can get the same program and you can watch it at the same time of day just as everybody else. And that goes for radio too. You can start listening to a talk show, you can listen to a sports broadcast, and you're not going to drive out of range. Not like the United States, you drive around a mountain and that radio station is gone. And if you drive out of range, if you drive from Pennsylvania, if you drive from Stroudsburg to Philadelphia, you're going to lose the Stroudsburg stations when you get the wind gap as you go over the mountain. Then you get to the Lehigh Valley, you'll get those stations, and you'll start to lose them as you get down towards Lansdale, towards Philadelphia, and you'll start picking up the Philadelphia stations. That's not the way that radio programming is done at a national level in Europe. If you want to listen to a program, you can drive all the way across France, and that program is going to be offered because there is a natural France 2, France 1, which is French 1, France 2, France 3, France 4, which is French channel number 4, and so on. And so you've got all these television channels that are provided, and radio channels that are provided by the license fee. Remember, that's how radio and TV from a public service standpoint is funded. And they all come out as the channel. There is a channel in England called Channel 4, and it is licensed specifically to push the boundaries of television. It's supposed to push the boundaries of television in new directions. It's supposed to take it outside of the BBC and present really challenging television. You may know the comedian Ali G, who is in Borat. What's his name? Can't remember his name off the top of my head. He started out as a comedian on Channel 4. And you can go back and you can look up some of his old work if you want to. And he did some really out-of-the-box thinking. One of the first episodes I saw was him showing his marijuana heist. And he was sitting in his little closet with teaspoons of marijuana, and he was thanking people for buying weed from him. I mean, that was before weed became legalized in the United States in many states as either a recreational or a medicinal property. And so this was really innovative, and that was actually by design. That's the way that Channel 4 was chartered. So channels have a very different meaning in other parts of the world. Now, I also mentioned terrestrial radio and terrestrial TV. I just want to clarify what those are again. A terrestrial broadcast refers to the Earth. That's what terra is, terra firma. So terrestrial broadcasting is broadcasting signal through the airwaves. Now, most broadcasters happen to also be picked up by satellite TV systems and cable TV systems. So the way that people watch television in the United States often originates from a terrestrial broadcaster, but the way that it's delivered is often through cable or through satellite, which are still known as broadcasters, but not terrestrial broadcasters. Another term that we refer to when we talk about accessibility of media is penetration. Penetration is talking about the audience side of things. It's talking about how widespread a particular medium is in a particular population of people. So let's take cable television, for example. What is the penetration of cable in the United States versus Europe? Is that interesting to know or not? According to Statista, a website that tracks media distribution, cable distribution in the United States shrank in the last year, 3%. It's at approximately 75% of the entire population has access to cable television. That's down from 78% the year before. And that's an overall trend. It's called churn, by the way, in the cable industry. If you lose subscribers, it's called churn. That churn, like you're churning butter. You're always trying to bring in new subscribers to offset the ones that you are losing. That's one of the factors that cable has to face in order to be a successful business. Satellite has the same situation. Satellite in Europe is more common. And the reasons for that are varied. It has to do with the corporations that started to establish TV viewing to begin with. The biggest company that has a satellite distribution network in Europe is the Sky Television Company, which is owned by the News Corporation. And so that Rupert Murdoch company, the same company, well, it's not Rupert Murdoch's anymore. It's his son's company. Forget his name. It begins with an L, his son. That company has a deep penetration of television into the heart of Europe versus in the United States, cable and satellite is much less seen. So those are terms that have to do with accessibility. Now, I know that many of you in this course have been struggling in the pandemic with all of the demands that you have placed on you, and the fact that this is an intense course, as I stated from the outset. It goes on every single day. It's relentless. You have to devote a lot of energy to being able to stay up with this course. And that goes for me as the professor too. And that's my job in this course. That's my job to make sure that I am imparting you and challenging you to have the kind of knowledge that you should have to be certified by this course when you receive a grade and to fit in with your overall curriculum, whether you're studying an undergraduate degree or a graduate degree. That's my job. I'm a professor. I'm supposed to push you. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. I'm not an emergency responder. I'm none of those things that can help you deal with the difficulties that you're having in your life to also handle this class. But what I can do very occasionally is I can offer something to my students that also helps me see if they are doing the work for the course. So for today and today only, if you can find a way to use hippopotamus and icicle in your country media post for today's lecture, I'll give you a perfect score. And the most creative ways possible are the ones that are going to receive the point. So it's in your best interest not to share this information with anybody else in the class, but to find a way to put hippopotamus and icicle into your post. Have a great day.